The first time I met Andrew, he was the kind of man who could light up any room he walked into. His laughter was infectious, his charm undeniable. When he proposed, it felt like the start of a fairy tale. For 5 years, everyone saw us as the perfect couple. Friends envied our seemingly unshakable bond, and strangers often remarked on how well we fit together. But what they didn't see was the growing distance between us, a chasm that widened slowly but surely, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. Life had a way of pulling us in different directions. Andrew threw himself into his work, determined to build a future for us. I suppose I started to lose myself, wondering if our love was more about appearances than connection. It was a painful realization, one that gnawed at me until I couldn't hold it in. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I finally said it. "Andrew, I think we need to talk." Reflecting on the past 5 years, I can barely recall the moments when we truly connected over a heartfelt dinner as a couple. Throughout that time, Andrew often seemed distant, his demeanor cold and detached. I attributed it to the pressures of work and did my best to support him, especially during social gatherings, hoping it might ease his burden. His fork paused mid-air. "What is it, Alicia?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes filled with concern. I think we've grown apart. I'm not happy anymore," I said, my voice trembling. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Andrew looked at me as though I had just torn his world apart. For a moment, he said nothing, and I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Then, he spoke. Andrew's fork paused mid-air, and his face hardened. He clenched his jaw, his hands resting stiffly on the table. "No," he said firmly. "This is ridiculous." I stared at him, waiting for more, but his lips pressed into a thin line as if sealing off any further words. His silence was louder than any argument he could have made, and it grated on my nerves. "Andrew, please," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "Say something. Don't just sit there like this, like we don't matter." He exhaled sharply through his nose and ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his reserved nature once again acting as a barrier between us. "Is this really how it's going to be?" I pressed, my voice rising. "I tell you I want a divorce, and all you can do is sit there like a statue? Don't you care at all?" Andrew's shoulders slumped, and his eyes flicked toward me briefly before he looked away. His silence was deafening, a sharp reminder of every conversation we'd never had. I let out a bitter laugh, the frustration bubbling to the surface. "You know what? Forget it. I'm done trying to get through to you. I can't keep living like this, Andrew." Without waiting for a response, not that I expected one, I pushed back my chair with a screech and stormed out of the room. The heavy thud of my footsteps echoed as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, breathing heavily, the tears finally spilling over. Why was it so hard for him to fight for us? To say something, anything, that would make me believe he cared? The silence on the other side of the door only reinforced what I had already decided. This marriage was over. There was nothing left for me here. The next day, as I packed my bags, I stumbled upon a stack of handwritten letters. They were addressed from a woman named Olivia, with the return address pointing to a school in a remote mountain village. At the time, I barely glanced at them, brushing it off as irrelevant. I was too focused on leaving, on reclaiming my independence. I moved into an apartment I had bought before our marriage and threw myself into decorating it, hoping to distract myself from the lingering ache in my chest. But that evening, as I scrolled through my phone, a video caught my eye. It was an interview with Andrew and a teacher named Olivia. They were seated side by side, and for the first time, I saw Andrew smiling. Not the polite, distant smile he wore at business events, but a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. My heart clenched as I watched him laugh with her, his body language relaxed and open, in a way I hadn't seen in years. The committee praised them endlessly, calling them a perfect match. The words stabbed at me, and a thought I couldn't ignore finally surfaced. Could they have been a couple? Then it hit me like a freight train. Olivia. The name from the letters. She wasn't just some colleague. She was his first love. I felt the ground shift beneath me, my chest tightening with betrayal and anger. How could he keep this from me? All these years, had he been carrying a torch for her while I was trying to keep our marriage from falling apart? My mind raced, piecing together moments that now seemed painfully clear. The way he avoided certain questions, the way he'd retreat into himself. Was she the reason for the growing distance between us? I sank onto the couch, the phone slipping from my fingers. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't bother to wipe them away. How could he do this? I whispered to the empty room. Was I just a placeholder? The thoughts spiraled, each one cutting deeper than the last. I had wanted to leave because of the loneliness, the lack of connection. But now, I felt something far worse. Betrayal. And it hurt in ways I never imagined it could. Over the next few weeks, he didn't contact me, and I didn't take the initiative to contact him either. I had grown numb to the process, determined to get through it as quickly and cleanly as possible. Then one day, he messaged me. "I'll pick you up in the evening." I assumed there was some social event he wanted me to attend with him. I replied curtly, "Just send me the address. No need to pick me up." By now, I knew he hadn't even been to the house. If he had, he'd have realized I wasn't living there anymore. It didn't matter. I had already decided I'd hand him the divorce agreement tonight and end this charade for good. Maybe going to the party would be a fitting final act in this farce of a marriage. I arrived at the venue, and Andrew approached me as soon as he saw me. Without a word, he took my hand and placed it on his arm, his expression unreadable. I was taken aback by how effortlessly Andrew could slip into his facade in front of people. He smiled that practiced smile, the one I had seen countless times, and guided me inside. I went along with his act, suppressing the bitterness bubbling under the surface. As the evening wore on, he maintained his charade, chatting with guests, occasionally glancing at me to ensure I played my part. By the end of the night, he leaned toward me, intending to kiss me on the forehead, but I instinctively stepped back. His face fell, a flicker of confusion and hurt crossing his usually composed demeanor. "We need to talk," I said firmly, steering him toward a quiet corner away from the crowd. Pulling out the divorce agreement, I handed it to him. "Let's finalize this amicably." He stared at the papers, his jaw tightening. "Who helped you with this?" he asked, his voice clipped. "No one," I replied. "I did it myself." A hint of frustration flashed in his eyes. He exhaled sharply, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. "We'll talk about it after I get back from my business trip, okay?" Without waiting for my response, he turned and walked away, heading back toward the company, as if nothing had happened. After a week, Andrew called me. His voice, heavy with restrained anger, demanded, "Where are you?" "In my apartment," I replied calmly, though my pulse quickened. "What apartment?" he snapped. His tone cut through the line like a blade. And then silence. A tense, suffocating silence that stretched too long. I could almost hear him wrestling with his emotions, trying to reel in his frustration. Finally, he exhaled sharply and said, more measured this time, "Okay, can we meet? Please, come home first." "No need," I said, my voice steady. "Let's talk outside." I'll share the location. I texted him the address of a cafe near his company building and sat there, anxiously checking the time. Minutes turned into hours as I finished one milkshake and then 2 teas. Each passing moment weighed heavier on my chest. He didn't come. Just as I was about to leave, I overheard a conversation between 2 employees who had just walked in. "The CEO is so kind," one of them said. "Teacher Olivia showed up without any prior appointment, but he made time to talk to her." My heart dropped. So he had time for Olivia, but not for me. Betrayal burned through my veins, but instead of confronting it, I left the cafe. I couldn't go back to the apartment, not with the crushing weight of his absence suffocating me. I needed an escape, something to dull the ache that was threatening to consume me. Without thinking twice, I found myself at a bar, ordering drink after drink, desperate to drown the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. The bitterness of betrayal, the sting of rejection. It all became a blur as the alcohol took hold, numbing me, if only for a while. When I was too drunk, someone from the staff called Andrew. He came and took me to our shared house. As he carried me, I half opened my eyes and slurred, "Andrew, is that you? Why didn't you come today, huh?" My words barely coherent, I suddenly threw up on his jacket. Instead of recoiling, his eyes filled with worry, not disgust. His gentle concern broke through the haze of my inebriation. He carefully helped me wash up and change into fresh clothes. The room spun as I screamed at him, my voice cracking with raw emotion. "You love Olivia, right? That's why you're so distant from me." Andrew froze, confusion clouding his face. "What? Olivia? Who told you about her?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. But I didn't let him finish. Tears streamed down my face as I interrupted. "Why don't you love me anymore? Why?" My voice cracked, betraying the deep hurt festering inside me. His gaze softened, and without saying a word, he stepped closer. He gently placed a kiss on my lips. A long, tender kiss that left me breathless. His lips trailed down to my neck, his touch sending a shiver through my body. Cradling me in his embrace, he whispered, "I have nothing with Olivia. You are the only one I love." I looked up at him, my tear-filled eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "How do I believe you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His silence was steady, yet his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't stop until the dawn broke. I was left utterly drained, my body and mind struggling to process the intensity of the night. When I finally opened my eyes, sunlight poured into the room. The clock read 2 p.m. On the nightstand, a neatly folded note awaited me. It read, "I had to step out to finish some work. I made breakfast for you. Please eat and get some rest. Don't go anywhere. I promise I'll be back soon." I couldn't bring myself to move. Exhaustion and resignation weighed me down. "Let's just wait for him," I whispered to myself. "Let's see what he has to say." He arrived in the evening, his steps hesitant as he approached me. Sitting beside me, he took a deep breath and said, "I've resigned from my CEO position." His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of finality. I blinked, stunned. "What? Why would you do that? You've worked so hard for it, Andrew." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing is more important than you, Alicia. I know I've neglected you all these years. I was so consumed by my ambition that I failed to see your pain. For that, I am truly sorry." A lump formed in my throat, but I forced myself to ask, "And Olivia?" His expression darkened slightly, a frown etching across his face. "Olivia is just another colleague," he said firmly. "But she was your first love," I blurted, my voice trembling. "I remember in college. You two were inseparable. Everyone knew you were a thing." Andrew exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. Olivia and I were never a couple. Not in college, not now. We were just friends. This time I only helped her with a charity event. That's it. I stared at him, my heart a mix of relief and lingering doubt. You should have told me, I said, my voice cracking. How was I supposed to know? You never share anything with me, Andrew. His face softened, and he reached out, his fingers lightly brushing mine. I know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've made so many mistakes, Alicia, but I want to change. I need you to know that you're the only one who matters to me. 2 years later, the laughter of their twin daughters filled the home as they toddled around, calling out Papa to Andrew with joyful giggles. Andrew's eyes lit up every time he heard their voices, a testament to the life they had rebuilt together. His devotion to his family was unwavering, and Alicia watched him with quiet contentment, knowing they had finally found their peace. Andrew's epilogue. When Alicia first mentioned the divorce, I dismissed it, thinking she was exaggerating or teasing. I couldn't have been more wrong. At the party, when she handed me the papers, my world crumbled. The weight of her words, the finality of that moment, it crushed me. I didn't know how to respond, so I ran. I thought time and space might heal the cracks between us, but all I did was deepen the divide. Returning from my business trip to an empty house was the wake-up call I never wanted. The silence screamed at me, accusing me of my failures. It wasn't just about the house. It was about Alicia, her hurt, her loneliness, her quiet pleas for connection that I'd ignored. I realized then that I had a choice to make, and for the first time, I truly chose her. Not the version of her I thought she should be, but Alicia as she was, brilliant, strong, and so heartbreakingly misunderstood by me. I know I made countless mistakes, expecting her to understand my intentions without ever expressing them. Love demands more than assumptions. It requires effort, communication, and vulnerability. I've learned that the hard way, but I've also learned that it's never too late to fight for the person who holds your heart. And fight, I will, every single day. If you like this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like these only at The Drama Diaries.